Hi, and welcome to Dip In and Out with Lucy, the podcast that opens up the discussion around domestic abuse. I am very fortunate this morning to be sitting down with the lovely Tracy Bradford. Tracy is a senior lecturer at the University of Derby, and she's a senior lecturer in policing. So I'm going to hand over to Tracy to explain a bit more about that and what kind of topics she covers.
So just to let you know, my role is I'm an ex-police officer. So I started off at Durham Constabulary in 2002, I think it was. And then I was on the response team for that. And then I went into West Mids. And then I worked in domestic abuse, and safeguarding on that side and investigation. And then I left West Mids because I had a degree in everything, I went into teaching policing. So now I did that in 2014. So now I'm at the University of Derby. So I teach on the professional policing degree. So those are our undergraduates who want to go into the police, and we cover a rather large bit of curriculum. However, I usually teach on the vulnerability and mental health side, along with the public protection side. So I do everything from mental health to modern slavery, hate crime, and also everything within domestic abuse, like the whole gamut of domestic abuse. But I also, and I really love doing this, I teach on the masters in criminal investigation. And I have a whole module on domestic abuse. So I'm really happy to have that. And because it's up to me to do the curriculum, I can choose whatever I want to cover. So I can really go into great depth with all the different types of domestic abuse and typologies and things. So it's really interesting. And those are usually people who want to be in the police. But I've also had somebody who was a DCI in Lincolnshire Police as well on that option.
Wow.
So that was great. So it's all about sort of giving everybody the knowledge about domestic abuse and how to deal with it, when you are in a policing context as well, and giving you like a wider kind of knowledge and critical knowledge of domestic abuse. So obviously today I'm going to talk about what I'm going to tell you about is what sort of things we teach, just some of the things that I teach. And then, have a bit more of a discussion on the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021, because that came in, and, there are all different things that it's put into play. So I'll have a general talk about that, and any other, questions you want to ask me about it, please rein me in, because I do go off on a tangent.
Listen, you're the expert. This is what I love.
Yeah. So probably I'll start on why I teach it. So I left the police, and what I really wanted to do was to give people the understanding about domestic abuse in all its forms and vulnerability. Because when I was in the police, I really didn't know that much. I mean, I went in with a law degree and a law master's, and I got the basics at training school, but when I went in, I really didn't understand about the jobs I was going to, the incidents that I was going to, understanding why it was usually intimate partner abuse, well, violence as it was called in those days, because we've changed it to domestic abuse now. And, there's certain things, and I will tell you, so I once went to a job, and this is something I do regret, and one of my students is asking, what do you regret? And one of these jobs, I went to a job where it was some bloke in Darlington had been chased by somebody with a baseball bat. So me and this lad, one of my colleagues, we went to it, and I got there, and he was probably in his 50s, which is what I am now, but this was like in about 2003 or something like that. And I was standing up, and I just went in and I was asking, right, what's happened? And he went, sit down, bitch. And I was like, oh my God. And my colleague, 6'6" guy, he was like, his jaw dropped. So anyway, this woman came up to me, obviously his wife, and just went, sorry, dear, he says that to every woman. And I left. So my regret is, why didn't I speak to her?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Because I didn't know.
No.
I didn't know. And I always think about that. And that was probably over 20 years ago. And
Wow.
I wished now that I actually took her into another room and explored that with her. But I didn't.
Because that's normalized behavior then to her, isn't it? You know,
It
you're
is.
seeing it from the outside going, hang on a minute, that's not normal.
Yeah.
But for
He calls
her,
all women
unfortunately.
bitches. So, you know, that was, and I just was like, I went on the radio and I went, right, he said this, I'm not dealing with him. And I walked out. And, you know, the control room were fine with that. So that was something that I often think about because I didn't know. And quite often you would go to jobs and you wouldn't understand why the person didn't want to leave that person. You know, I'd turned up to a job on my own, and the female partner, you know, had blood, you know, coming from her face. The children were crying. I was just outside the address, and then he turns up again. I mean, don't get me, you know, there are male victims, but generally the jobs I went to were female, female survivors or victims. And, you know, I would be there, I was single crewed waiting for somebody else to come because it's daytime, we're all single crewed. And, you know, I'd end up, I was trying to arrest him. He came back and I started to arrest him. The children were crying, you know, it's a big scene. And she starts hitting me.
Wow.
You know, and people are saying, well, why didn't you do anything about her? But I understand why she did that, because it looked to him that she was on his side.
Yes.
And her world is him.
It's that bubble,
house.
isn't it? Yeah.
So these are the sorts of things that I want to sort of convey to and look at some of the academic research behind it as well, to teach our prospective police officers, so the ones doing who are doing the policing degree, to let them understand, actually, this is why this happens. This is why when you go to a job, this happens. How do you deal with it? How do you get the best evidence off somebody? Try not to be judged, you know, all these myths as well, like victim myths and things. So, you know, we do discuss that. And we also look at the role of policing. We look at criminological theories around domestic abuse and different types of domestic abuse, different typologies of relationships as well. So it's giving them that knowledge so that when they do go into the police, it is something that they understand and actually want to deal with. Because quite often when I was in the police service, you would be, you know, you'd hear it on the radio, it would be street robbery in process, and people go, I'll go to it, I'll go to it, I'll go to it. You know, people would drop, as we used to call it, refs. They'd drop their refs for it because it was a sexy job, you know, running around town and blue lights. But
blue lights.
Domestic in progress, you could hear that tumbleweed because nobody wanted to go to them. I mean, I did, because I kind of understood, you know, it was usually another female. Sometimes it wasn't, but it was like, you know, this is what we're here for. So that's, you know, that's what I wanted to do, you know, make better police officers, because I know more about policing now than I did when I was in the police.
Yeah. And do you know what I think is fantastic is, you know, in all those years ago, when we know that things were very different then, we didn't have the conversations obviously like this that you had now. It just wasn't heard of. And what's amazing is that you had that kind of gut instinct to know that that was something you needed to be involved in, because you probably understood it, you know, and understood that actually at the end of the day they still need somebody there. And actually that's probably going to escalate if somebody doesn't get involved. If there isn't intervention, then it probably will escalate. And it's amazing that in that time when people didn't want to know, and unfortunately now people still don't necessarily want to know, but shaping the police officers for the future, that's incredible. So
that's the reason why I left, and that, you know, I wanted to go and deal with that, because actually having a theoretical understanding does it, you know, it's sort of the way we understand domestic abuse. It informs us on what we can actually do about it. You know, we discussed, we discuss things about criminological theories, about learned behaviour as well, because that is a big thing. Learned behaviour, which is actually then normalised, and that's why people act in the way that they do. Both the person who is being abused and also the abuser as well. Yeah. So we specifically look at intimate partner abuse.
Yeah.
Another one which I did come across as well, and people didn't really talk about it, was child to parent abuse and violence as well.
Yeah. And that'll probably come as a shock to some people as well, won't it? Like, what you on about? What you're talking about? Well, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I remember going to a job where it was somebody we would go to quite often, to a single mum, and the child, who was, I think he was probably about 16, so he would come under the domestic abuse sort of legislation. He would just trash the house, just things like that, and nobody really thought about it. And what people always say there with that one is, you actually, get a grip of your child. Yeah, get a grip of your child, be a better parent, give them some discipline.
But that's where the learned behaviour comes in, isn't it, as well? Because that whatever behaviour that child is displaying is because there's something that's gone on where it's been allowed to develop, probably, and not even allowed to develop. It's just, it is unfortunately one of those things that isn't really talked about enough at all, child to parent abuse.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've ever have you had a PEGS, so the parents' education growth. I can't remember the last bits, because sorry about that.
No, she's amazing. Yeah, she's a lovely woman.
Michelle from the PEGS.
Yes.
They're doing a lot. There's a lot more academic research on that as well. But people who I've spoken to, who are in the police, people who are specials in my class, they say we go to these sorts of jobs all the time, and it's not. Most people say, "Oh, just bad parents," when in fact there is some specific help that they really need.
Yeah.
And discussing it with Michelle, they get social services, just put them on parenting courses.
Yeah.
When there's something, there's something else
deeper
underlying. Yeah. But what Michelle did say was that actually the police that she dealt with were really good.
That's
so
brilliant.
Yeah, social services was the one that she had difficulties with, because that's the thing. With you can say to somebody who's got it's their partner, well, why don't you leave them? But you can't do that to your child.
Absolutely. And this idea of it being a lottery almost, to get, like you say, the police were good but children's services weren't. It shouldn't be a lottery whether you get a decent police officer, a decent social worker, any of the kind of intervention services that come into contact with victims and survivors. It shouldn't be a lottery. It should just be, this is across the board. This is how we, and obviously it would take a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
But it's for somebody who is in a situation where they're already at crisis point, they're already terrified in so many different ways, on so many different levels. The people that they're meant to look up to in terms of authority should be the people that are there to help them and support them and protect them. And that's the scary thing, that doesn't always happen.
No, it doesn't. And I must admit, sometimes when you speak to, when I did teach on the police degree apprenticeship, and quite a lot of people going, I'm dealing with people's lives, I'm dealing with they can't sort out their own lives and things like that. And it's much more complex than that. And that's why, I want to teach about the complexities of any kind of domestic abuse, and that includes things like so-called honour-based abuse.
Yes.
Yeah, and I always call it so-called. On my lectures, I always say, it's not honour-based abuse, it's so-called honour-based abuse, because there is no honour in it at all.
No, I agree.
So I always correct people on that one.
I love it. That's exactly what we need. No, quite right.
Yeah. So, it's something, you know, that I am very, very passionate about as well. So if you're thinking, you know, it's to sort of sort out people's understanding about why people leave an abusive partner, about how to better investigate domestic abuse and to be able to see the signs. And also there is a big push in policing, and it does state this in the, you know, as on the guidelines for the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021, about using a trauma-informed approach.
Could you explain a bit? I mean, I know I understand what that means. I work for my local charity, but a lot of people won't understand what a trauma-informed approach means, and it crops up a lot, doesn't it? That sort of terminology.
Yeah, it's so it's kind of like actually understanding about what, you know, how people deal with trauma, how they present as well, because sometimes I mean, this is just my general sort of idea about it. It's about how you deal with that person, because it's sort of how can you support that person, recognizing the impact of what that trauma has had on their well-being and their lives, and how to actually sort of empower them. And it's also about how to communicate properly with them, because sometimes somebody may present quite, you know, they might not look as though they're upset and things like that. And this is also, it comes into when I teach about sexual abuse, and obviously that's part of domestic abuse as well, rape and sexual offences. And there's all this whole thing about rape myths too. That's another podcast.
I was just going to say, we'll set that up as a whole other podcast. I love it.
Yeah, you know, people deal with trauma in their own way. So it may be about, you know, about your approach as a police officer when somebody has been traumatized, and about using empathy as well, being able to communicate with them in the correct way, not to be judgmental as well, because of the way they're presenting. Because you could present as hysterical, you could present, you know, you could present as actually quite numb, and people think, well, there's obviously it's not happened because they're so calm. So it's having, you know, it's having that sort of thing. It's about trying to, and it's about trying to reduce the negative impact of the trauma. And another thing which we also discuss is also about, obviously when you're investigating something, whether it be domestic abuse, etc., sexual abuse, it's that traumatized, that secondary trauma that you give them as well. You know, they're traumatized once by the actual acts themselves, and then having to keep on repeating to a police officer again and again and again, and that's actually traumatizing them even more by playing through it. And then it will, you know, you have the police doing it, and then you'll have to go to court and do it as well. Which, you know, it's realizing that has the impact on somebody, and actually recognizing the signs and symptoms of it as well. You know, and it's something that it's worked with social care as well, isn't it? And also it's also working with the police now, so it's something that the police do know about, and they, you know, they are bringing it into their own practice as well, you know, to police forces and things.
That's fantastic, because it is a big, like you say, the re-traumatization of having to go through. And also if you're going through, say, at the same time, family court as well as maybe criminal court, there'd be so many things that are going on, and you're spinning so many plates, and children's services, you know, school involved if you have children. There's so many areas that you're being re-traumatized by having to repeat the same thing over and over again. And to have that trauma-informed approach in all those areas would be fantastic. Absolutely.
And it's understanding the stigma that's attached with that as well. You know, when, you know, if you have your car stolen, there's no real stigma attached to that. There's no, although people shouldn't be, but people are embarrassed about what's happened to them. They're stigmatized by it, especially when it comes to, intimate partner, the stigmatization of the child. There's definitely within child to parent abuse as well. There's a lot of stigma there around that. So it's about, putting the policies within policing and other other sort of organisations, and also about safeguarding as well. And actually, being able to trust, especially where I'm teaching, to trust the police.
That's a biggie.
But unfortunately, at the moment, due to all sorts of things that have been in the press and all the reports and things like that, at the moment, the trust in the police, especially around women and girls, is fairly low at the moment, due to, like the C.I.C report. So these are things that we talk about. The C.I.C report that came out about the Met Police.
Yeah.
And there's specifics around domestic abuse within policing, and how they deal with it. There's also about, obviously, sexual offences as well. So it's about getting that trust back. And I think education, I think that really does help with that, educating police officers, and also letting the public know that actually police officers are being educated to deal with domestic abuse and sexual offences as well. So it's about sort of, and also giving them the person the choice as well about what services they want to use and things like that.
That's massive, because two words you just said there, trust and choice,
are
two of the biggest things a victim or a survivor has taken away from them for a very long time. And so, when people say, oh, well, you're out of the situation now, therefore, you must be able to trust people again. You may never be able to 100% trust anyone ever again. You may be able to work on it and try and move forward, but you may never actually be able to completely do it. And that's down to each individual. And choice as well, your choices are taken away from you. So to give those, I always say it's almost like giving back the control of your life to the victim or survivor, because that's the thing they've had taken away. And part of that control is the trust and the choices that you don't get to make, in your own life, and that you can't, trust that easily. So if those services can show that, almost like compassion, really, to say, look, you can trust in the process. I think a big one for me always was, when I worked for my local charity, domestic abuse charity, was it's almost like, in the sense with the police, like not making promises they can't keep. Do you know what I mean? Because if you get somebody's hopes up to a point where they think, right, I'm never going to have to deal with that person ever again, and actually they're either out on bail or they've breached the non-molestation or whatever, it's the trust is broken, isn't it? And there's only so much you can do. So it is trying to get that trust level right, definitely.
I mean, I always used to say, I can never promise you anything, but what I promised was that I would do my best. I promise, I used to say, I'll promise I will do my best, and I really did, because I mean, I was pulled up by a sergeant when I was on a volume crime team, and I dealt with all the domestic abuse, and I was told, why haven't you written this one off yet? You're wasting your time on this. And I said, it's never a waste of time.
No.
And actually, when I left, I was dealing with a lady who'd had a non-molestation order breached. And unfortunately, because there was no corroborating evidence, CPS said no to it, because, there's nobody else there to witness it, whatever. And I did try my best, and I said, I'm really, really sorry. And she said, well, at least you were somebody who believed me.
And sometimes that is because you can't, we can't be knowing what's going to happen at the next stage or see the future. But if you know that somebody is doing their best and in your best interest doing their best, then that's all you can ask for, really. And it's more than a victim and survivor's ever had. But it is very tough, that. But you're right, trust and choices are definitely a big aspect that they need to be able to feel when they're dealing with services, 100%.
Yeah, so so that's something that we sort of try and teach as well, and
Yeah.
it's something that's now coming more into the fore as well, I think, around policing, which is really good. But obviously there's the whole thing around the C.I.C report and police perpetrated domestic abuse as well. So that's there's a super complaint about that as well, which was out there. So these are things that we cover all of these within within my teaching and things as well, just to make them aware of it. Don't get me wrong, there are some great people in the police.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic people who really do care, but there is an element within all society that aren't like the David Carrick and Wayne Cousins, those sorts of people. They are there, but they are in other other vocations as well.
I often say that perpetrators, hide in plain sight, and very often they are in positions of authority, and not just within the police force, like you say, in all areas and all walks of life, where that power that they crave anyway, power and control are the two things the perpetrator wants. And if they're in a position of authority or the public eye or whatever, then that is actually going to make them even more dangerous, because they can hide in plain sight, as I call it. But,
they do, So this morning I was looking at because I always do it for my teaching, I was looking at the domestic abuse homicide figures.
Yes.
So I've only got the ones for the year ending March 2022, because that's the latest ones.
Right.
And it said that female victims are more commonly killed by a partner or ex-partner. So that's 33%. Right. Or a family member, that's 13%. So we can talk about family members in a bit as well.
Yeah.
So there were 134 domestic homicides in the year ending March 2022. That's an increase of 18 compared to the year before.
Right.
Yeah. And it's the highest number since the year ending March 2019. So there was 140 then. So out of 134 domestic homicides, 78 victims were killed by a partner or ex-partner. So that's up to 69 of them. 40 were killed by a parent, son or daughter. That's up to 28. And 16 were killed by another member of the family. So, yeah. I mean, there are more, I don't know the figure for homicides in general. So more men are killed, however, it's usually an acquaintance or something else.
Yes.
Whereas, almost half of adult females, that's 46%, were killed in a domestic homicide. And that's 84 of them. And out of 84 female victims, 81 were killed by a male suspect. So that's pretty high.
Yeah.
And it said males are much more likely to be victim of domestic homicide, only 11%, so that's 50 of the male homicides being domestic related last year. Wow. And that's a similar proportion to the year before. So a third of all female victims, the suspect was their partner or ex-partner, 33%. So that's 60 of them.
Wow.
So so the figures, they're still out there, and I always like it to Jess Phillips always does it every year, reads out every single name in Parliament. She does it every year.
That's incredible. That
is incredible. So
very powerful as well, because sometimes I think when people listen to statistics, they don't always think of them as people. It's as numbers, as figures, whereas actually to read out those names, it just makes it real, that these are actual human beings that have been killed in a horrendous and unlawful way, and what are we going to do about it to stop it? And just out of interest, in those sorts of cases, do you ever know, and this is me being completely unaware, if they have reported say domestic abuse incidents in the past, like in terms of the numbers? Would it be that maybe they haven't reported anything, therefore obviously their risk factors quite high, or they have reported but then it hasn't been followed up, or it has been followed up and nothing's come of it, that sort of? I was just wondering if that was something.
I don't know any figures, but every time there's a domestic homicide, there will be a panel that do a domestic homicide review. So they get all the agencies together and they look at everything. You know, they even look at past partners and things like that as well.
Yeah.
So you can get these domestic homicide reviews. They always do it. So, you know, there's always, they investigate it. Sometimes if there has been something where the police have been involved, the IOPC may do a report as well. They might investigate if they think there's something that's amiss there, if there's any learning that needs to be done. So if you think about ones that have probably been in the press, so Alice Ruggles. So Alice Ruggles was Northumbria police, and that was like quite a terrible sort of, a lot of stalking and harassment, where her ex-partner, who she met him on the internet, and he was in the army as well, so they'd seen that there was some real issues around the armed forces, about you know, the reporting that she'd done to the police as well. So they look at all that and they try and learn from it, and they do a review at the end of every year. So I don't know, when you do read some of these and the domestic homicide reviews, you do see that maybe you know, there might have been violence, but then there might not have been violence as well, because there was no actual, I don't think there's any actual violence in Alice and her perpetrator's relationship.
Wow.
And it was more stalking harassment, so that's why. Have you ever read the book Control by Jane Monckton Smith?
No, I think it sounds like I need to.
You do. So Jane Monckton Smith, I've got it here actually.
Oh, brilliant. Oh yes, I need to read that.
So Jane Monckton Smith, it's all about, she's a professor of public protection, real expert, and she talks about how dangerous relationships and how they end, and it's all about coercive controlling behaviour, because there has been some academic research around a lot of like sort of homicides have been with the coercive and controlling behaviour aspect. So and actually when I was taking statements in my younger days in the police early on, I was doing my my probationary period, etc. You always should, not everybody did it, but you should actually ask about the relationship and when things went wrong. So when I was in the police, coercive and controlling behaviour was not a criminal offence specifically. No. Which is an absolute shame, because there was always an element of coercive and controlling behaviour.
Absolutely.
And you would start off like that. A little bit of violence maybe, but you would find most of it was that control. There's more control, and I think now they're changing. So the dash form that they do. The dash form is being replaced. It's been piloted at the moment. It's been replaced with a DARA form, so domestic abuse risk assessment. And that is supposed to be more focused on coercive and controlling behaviour. And also on so-called honour-based abuse.
Which is definitely needed, isn't it?
They've taken out a couple of questions which I think should still be in there. Because they've taken out the question about abusing animals. I'm surprised at that. And there's less focus on sexual offences.
Because a big part of a perpetrator is they have no compassion, no empathy for anyone or anything. So an animal included, so you would think, well, actually, that surely is a flag, a red flag right there.
So it's done with research. Let's see, the DARA form. Got it here.
I wonder, that is interesting.
Let me have a look. So they've just changed it, and it's going to go through frontline. So frontline officers will do it.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to focus to identify coercive control, so that officers on the front line can make a better risk assessment.
Yeah.
And it's been identified as the preferred by the College Professional Committee at College of Policing and the National Police Chiefs Council as a preferred risk tool for first responders in domestic abuse.
Right.
So they developed it, and they used research with international evidence, with the support of survivors, frontline police officers, voluntary and charity support services, and academics as well. So it's been evaluated, so it should be rolling out fairly soon with all the different police services.
Wow. And again, these are all kind of things that, the general public don't really understand goes on behind the scenes. So, even if you go to a support service, a charity, something like that, support, they will talk, if you ring them up, they will go through that process with you over the phone. They will have that assessment made to see, sort of the level of risk. And it's something else that just popped into my head as well was when we think about obviously whether somebody, in terms of the history of the relationship, there is Clare's Law. I mentioned that in a guest on a podcast yesterday, and I mentioned that. Now, obviously, I think the podcast is sort of worldwide, but this is a UK kind of Clare's Law, isn't it? That where you can go and find out about previous partners that your partner might have if you've got any concerns. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is it family and friends can do it as well?
Yeah, family and friends can do it. And also, say the police deal with somebody, they might even say, do you know what, I think we better go and tell their partner. And they will go and inform a partner as well. They will make that decision to tell that partner about their about the person that they're with at that moment. So it's on both sides as well. So it's the right to know. But like I was saying, it's been put in, so that it is mentioned in the guidelines for the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 as well. So it's put it more in stone, really, when it's dealing with that.
And could you, because obviously, I don't know, maybe people do know about the Domestic Abuse Act, and obviously there were big changes, weren't there, in terms of evidence and things in the last couple of years. So would you explain a bit about, in terms of what we've progressed in, with the Act?
So it was brought out. It was obviously the bill first. Its objectives were to promote awareness of domestic abuse, put it as top of the Home Office agenda. One of the things it did was recognise children as victims of domestic abuse in their own right. So any child that was in a home where there was domestic abuse, whether they heard it or saw it, they're sort of deemed as a victim of it now. And police officers should, when they go to any incident of domestic abuse, whether the children are upstairs sleeping, they need to go and check on the children. And that was an issue that was going on. Another issue, Daniel Pelker. Do you remember the case of Daniel Pelker in Coventry?
Yes.
And actually, some of the police officers who went to the domestic abuse incidents with the mother and various partners didn't go and check on the children. So you must, even if there's, because sometimes they go, they're sleeping.
They're sleeping. Leave
them you go and check on them. And check on them. One of the things, I must admit, one of the things that really got me when I was in Darlington, I was in my probationary period, and we had a job where a lady had called us from a telephone box. Remember telephone boxes?
Oh yes, those were the days, putting your 10p in and
she hurry up from the flat, and she's in a telephone box. So we picked her up and everything, and then we went to the house, and her partner was there, and the little girl was there, little tiny girl. And she said, what did she say? I said, what happened? Because you can still talk to the child, even, sometimes police officers are a bit scared of talking to the child. And it's the voice of the child, which is another thing which we're promoting. A little girl, tiny little thing. I can't remember how old she was. I'm not very good at children's ages, but she said, true Darlington style, "Daddy batted mummy," and then did some kind of kung fu kick.
Oh God.
And that was a little tiny girl, and
You're not telling that child to say that or do that. That is what that child has seen.
Yeah, that child has seen it, and she wasn't upset or anything like it. She went, "Daddy batted mummy," and I was like horrified that she was actually not upset by it. So obviously it was something quite normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
a difficult one to explain to people as well, isn't it? The how somebody stays in a situation, or stays in a situation for a particular period of time, it could be decades, is because that behavior is normal to them. And to the outside world, it seems crazy. But if you are slowly being conditioned and slowly having your self-esteem, your self-worth, everything eroded over a long period of time, then that behavior, when somebody does call you a stupid fat cow, or you're an ugly bitch, or kicks and punches, all the rest, then that is going to be normal to you, because and I think you said something earlier that was important, talking about how you couldn't speak to a woman separately, and it's because it's that bond, isn't it? It's that trauma bond, and it's that bubble that they're in. No one can come between me and you. We are in this world together, and no one, doesn't matter if it's the police, children's service, whoever you are, you will not come between us. And that's a really difficult thing to try and explain to people, because they just don't see the victim's perspective as, actually, this is my normal life. And a child seeing a parent being kicked is normal to them. Because that's all they've ever known.
So and another thing about that as well is, it's like if they have, quite often they have tried to get away from that person, and they always go back to them, because maybe to them it's kind of safer, because the most dangerous time is when you're trying to break up with that person. And that's where you get your quite often you get your sort of murder suicides and things like that, because if I can't have you, no one else will.
Absolutely. And I don't even want you necessarily, but I don't want anybody else having you either. I don't really want you, but the world doesn't. At the end of the day, nobody's going to have you. And another sort of is, a lot of the time perpetrators will threaten to either kill themselves, won't they? They'll threaten the children.
Blackmail. I mean, I was interviewing a young lad. I think he was just about 16, and I did all the video interviews. And I remember this lad saying that he used to have to get in between him and his mum and dad, when the dad was trying to assault her. And then he would say, "I'm going to go and kill myself." And then he'd go out the house and go to the sort of the A46, I think it was, in Coventry. And then this poor kid, would have to run after him to try and stop him and things like that. So there's trauma around that for him as well. So it's really good that they're recognising children, as
definitely. It's about time. 100%. It's time that children aren't stupid. They are bright. They see things, and they will just, more often than not, they'll just tell you the truth. They'll tell you what they've seen. They've got nothing. They've got no angle. They've got nothing to gain. They will just say it as they see it, because it's that innocence of youth, isn't it? A right to a voice, like you say. The voice of the child is imperative. So many times. So that's one. So that's an area. So with the Domestic Abuse Act, stalking and harassment, was that included previously, or is that now included as a crime? Or again, am I getting that wrong?
So stalking and harassment has always been a crime. Let's see if I can. But it's sort of something that they talk about it, because it's under the Protection of Harassment Act of 1997, actually.
Right.
There's no statutory definition of stalking, really.
That's what I think I was thinking of.
There's none yet. So they've got a list of things about, like them following somebody, attempting to contact that person.
The unwanted gifts, isn't it?
Unwanted gifts, Oh, the unwanted gifts, because people think, oh, that's nice. They've dropped something off at the house, and it's lovely.
Or what they'll also do is they'll not necessarily send the gifts or whatever to you. They'll send it to the children. And if you don't want something, that's another way of the coercive control is, I'll send those gifts. It's not going to you, so don't you worry about it. It's going to the children, but it's still coming into your home. It is still a way of controlling you and having something that they decide needs to be in your home sent to your home. And it's another way of controlling the situation. It may not be you directly they're sending it to, but they're making sure that they keep that, letting you know that they are still in control. Or think they are.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all sorts of things that can happen with stalking, but we have got stalking protection orders as well.
Yeah.
But those were brought in 2019.
Yeah.
So and then obviously that it sort of came to force on the 20th of January of 2020.
Yeah.
So you can get stalking protection orders. So there's all these different types of orders. One of the things that was brought in around the Domestic Abuse Act was although the statute, so there is a statutory definition, but what they did do is they put in economic abuse as part of it. And
that's a biggie. I did a podcast recently with Rosie Lyon on financial and economic abuse.
To
talk about the difference between what is financial abuse and what is economic abuse. And so many victims, we've got past that stage, like you said before, about domestic violence. We now obviously say domestic abuse because it's an umbrella of everything, including the physical aspect of abuse. But financial is one that is devastating. It changes lives forever. You can be left homeless, you can be in a situation where you're still in the house with the person because you're tied to a mortgage, and there's so many issues when it comes to the economic and financial abuse. So that's fantastic. So that's in there now as well.
Because they've got all the, so it's such a, when I teach, it's such a long definition, because it's got it's somebody who's personally connected who's 16 or over. I remember it was 18 and over, so they changed that. 16 and over, and its abuse can be physical, sexual, violent, threatening behaviour, and then obviously they brought in coercive and controlling behaviour in 2015. Economic abuse, psychological, emotional, or other abuse. So it's so wide now, which is really good.
And covering a lot more in terms of what we would consider the types of abuse that there are. It's making sure that they're all kind of within that act, which is needed. And we're all hearing these terms now, aren't we? Like coercive control. And we may hear it, or people see it on TikToks, or they see narcissists, and they don't always necessarily, I think, appreciate what coercive control is. So if you have got a few more minutes to explain a little bit, if that's okay, about what coercive control actually is.
So they've got to be personally connected at the time the behaviour took place. So it's going to be intimate partners, family members, because if you take, coercive controlling behaviour is also part of so-called honour-based abuse as well. And it's got to have a serious effect on the victim. So it's caused them to fear violence, that, will it be used against them on 2 or more occasions. It can be repeatedly or continuously. So if you're thinking about types of behaviours, anything that's controlling or monitoring somebody's daily activity. So, they've got to account for where they've been, what they've been doing, what they can wear, when and what they can eat, if they are allowed to, when and where they may sleep as well. So if you think about, do you remember the case about Alex Skeel? So the young man who was days from death. I mean, his partner, she was doing, making him sleep on the floor and things like that as well, stopping him from eating. So, you know, all these sorts of things, you know, having, you know, monitoring Facebook, monitoring, you know, their social media as well, keeping all the passwords to bank accounts and things. Isolation's a pretty big one, keeping that person isolated.
Yeah.
Like that happened with Alex Skeel as well.
Yeah.
He didn't see his parents, friends or anything like
And
that, because
yeah,
then there was nobody he could turn to.
no. And
Um,
sometimes they're clever enough, they move you out of the area. Well, we're going to have to move. We'll go and, you know, start a whole new life somewhere else.
yeah,
Again, the bubble, it's just me and you. Or if you've got kids, it's me, you and the kids. And you are then taken away from your support network. You have no support around you, and you have to try and build up that support. But that's not the same as having the people that you've kind of either grown up with or your family around you. And isolation, I think there's not enough said or spoken about in terms of isolation, because, you know, we've all gone through COVID. We've all seen what it's like to be in our homes. Imagine that on a daily basis, but not being able to even speak to your family and friends. Or if you do, you're rushed off the phone, or oh no, you have to come do this, or there's some excuse that you can't spend time with them. Isolation's a biggie.
Yeah, things like intercepting messages and phone calls, trying to stop them from getting the support that they actually need. Another one which maybe people don't think about, so if you can't speak English, refusing to interpret or hindering access to communication.
Yes. And can you imagine that if you're trying to report an incident to the police and the only person that can interpret for you is your perpetrator? Then,
well, that's where language line comes into it. So their police officers are told never use anybody from the family, but it's really hard for them because in the good old days when you could get interpreters out, it was dead easy. You got your local interpreter to come out and you knew them. Whereas they changed the funding and things like that, and you know it might be like you know, like a difficult to actually get somebody in to interpret because they come from all over the country. They're on the, you know, they're on the phone or something like that. We used to get our locals to come out, but I have been before, and I remember we had somebody who'd been arrested the night before, and it was a lady, I think she was Kurdish, and I went with an interpreter to see if we could get a statement off her. And in the end, I mean, she'd been over here for 8 years, could not speak a word of English because she'd been so isolated. Her children could speak a bit of English, but I didn't use them because they were quite young. And she was telling me things through the interpreter that, you know, she'd been in hospital, he'd broken her nose and things like that, but the hospital didn't know. And I said, well, we can do something about this. And she said, I don't want to do that. And I said, okay. So, you know, I was like saying to her, forget what we're doing, you know, why don't you leave him? Why don't I ring? I think it's Panaga was our local one for women from ethnic minorities, and I was ringing Panaga to see if I'd get her a place, and she just didn't want to go, and there's nothing I could do about that. And I know the interpreter said to me, he said, oh, I've never seen anybody try so much. But I was there for ages with her, trying to convince her, you know, please, if we can't do anything about it, if you don't want to go to court, that's fine, but please do leave him. Please let's give you the help. There's nothing I could do about it. So that's when I thought,
and that's a tough one, isn't it? And something we were talking about before we started recording was about society not understanding when somebody chooses to stay. And I think that is possibly, like you say, the level of risk escalates massively when you leave a domestically abusive situation. But also if you stay, you know, a lot of people choose to stay for a number of reasons. It could be that they're caring for them, like you say, it could be that they don't know anybody else, can't speak English, and they are completely reliant on their partner. It could be financial, it could be so many things, the children involved, everything. And I think, you know, in the cases of society judging people for staying, I think we need to be a lot kinder and say, actually, if that person chooses to stay, well, then that is their choice. But maybe what we can do is look at how they can stay safely, you know, which sounds a bizarre statement.
It does,
But maybe there are ways that if they choose to stay, that there are ways that they can keep themselves safe and sort of educate themselves. But that's a really hard one. And I found it really hard to get my head around that, what, you know, but then again, a lot of people, you know, we stay for a very long period of time, and when we look back now and you think, actually, yeah, I can see why I would be judging somebody and thinking, why would they do that? But actually, you can't do that because you don't know the situation. Every situation is unique. Every situation has lots of different dynamics within it, and lots and lots of things that you would be unpicking forever. So you have to be understanding, don't you? Do the best you can and help people as much as you can and hope that they want to leave in some way. And if they can't, then work out how they can stay as safe as possible. But yeah, and this is why it's so important to do these kind of podcasts, because it is so complex. It isn't as simple as people think.
No.
And it is a difficult conversation to have, but trying to do it like this makes it into a conversation instead of it being, you know, intimidating or frightening. It should be something that is a conversation anyone can have. Definitely.
And culturally is that one with it, you know, and that links on to so-called honor-based abuse. You got maybe pressures from that community as well, which she probably was because she was Kurdish. So, you know, it all links into that sort of thing. So it's not just their partner, it would probably be maybe members of his family. I know her family were in, I think they were in Iraq. So her mum and dad, I was saying to her, would your mum and dad want you to live with somebody who would do this to you? And she was going, no, obviously through interpreter. And I said, well, but she said, I just can't leave him. The culture is a cultural thing as well. So, you know, it was very difficult. And then if you get onto things like, if you think, we always think about a victim of domestic abuse being younger people, don't we? But if you think about elder abuse too, so like part of coercive control behaviour is like preventing somebody taking the medication and things, and accessing health or social care as well. If you think of we discuss intersectionality, obviously, you know, if you have got a disability or age or something like that, it makes it even more difficult for you to access some of the services that are available. And then actually using substances to control a victim as well, using drugs to control their victim or alcohol to control their victim. You know, it's so difficult. Children, using animals as well. You've got pets, threatening to harm your children or your pets.
I think as well, you know, with the elder abuse aspect and abuse of older people, you know, a lot of the time, if you've been in that relationship or that marriage for, you could be in your 70s now, you know, generationally, you didn't leave your husband or your wife, you stayed in that marriage. You know, once that was it, you said, I do, that is it, you are together. And there is no, you know, you bring shame, you know, depending on, obviously, if you, for example, Roman Catholic or something, it would be considered, you can't do that, you can't get divorced, you have to, you know, so you are actually tied into that marriage because of the fact that you feel that there may be shame brought on you for doing it. And hopefully things are starting to change and people are starting to realize, well, actually the only shame is on the person that is the perpetrator and what they're doing. The shame is not on me as the victim. I'm the one that is actually going to do my best to break away from this if possible. But changing that mindset and changing that image of generations, and again, you know, you can't even imagine, can you, being in a marriage for 50, 60 years or something, and then going, you know, I'm going to leave. That person,
where are you going to go?
Where are you going to go? That person's been part of your life for the majority of your life. You know, what are you going to do? Your children have probably left home. They've got their own lives. You've become completely reliant on that person. And I don't think that, and again, I did a podcast with Carrie Bauer from Age UK back in May, I think it was. And and we talked about, you know, it is, again, you know, very unseen, very kind of lack of validation for those who are, you know, older people that are being abused. And again, this is why I want to do this, and this is why Dipping Out with Lucy is discussion, inclusion, progression, because there is nobody being left out. Anyone can be a victim of domestic abuse. It doesn't matter who you are. You can have all the money in the world and still be a victim of domestic abuse. You know, you can be the most successful person on the planet and still be a victim of domestic abuse.
You can.
It happens to it, you know, it can happen to anyone. And I think you know, it's so important, the work that you do, trying to get that message out there, and to help those police officers that are training for those kind of future generations that are the young ones now who will be coming up through the years. Then it's incredible.
And I was always thinking, I know there's no academic thought behind this, but I always thought we were always going to jobs where it was like a neighbour had called it in because the neighbour heard, because they live right next door to the neighbour. But you know, every now and again, I remember going when I was in Darlington, having to be thrown over a wall to go into somebody's big house, to open the electric gates to get to this big massive house, because the partner had called it in. And he would always say, oh, she's an alcoholic, you know, and that's why she's like this. When in, you know, there's BMWs and, you know, in the driveway, and you always think of people who are victims of domestic abuse to be poor people.
A certain type, and it's not.
Certain type, you know, working class.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, it's everywhere. It's just it's easier to hide when you are you've got sort of money behind it. I know one of my students is quite interesting. He was on single crewed on his own when it's his Leicestershire police, single crewed on his own, and he was telling me, because he used it as part of his one of his essays, because they had to sort of reflect upon a vulnerability issue. And he stopped this car because the way she was driving, and she had 2 kids in the back, and he sort of stopped her, and she just went, told him. Her husband worked from home, had lots of money, very well off, and she was allowed to take the kids on a Tuesday or something to McDonald's. She was allowed to. Most of the time she stayed at home. And he was a successful businessman, and in the end they'd never been called out to the house or anything like that. This was the first time they had contact with her, and it turned out from the dash risk assessment form, it was a high risk.
Wow.
Yeah, high risk.
And you just don't know, do you? You do not know when you're passing somebody in the street. I often think that when I was saying something about domestic abuse, and when I did a podcast with Rachel Lemon recently talking about being a professional and also being the victim of domestic abuse, and how you can walk into the workplace, and actually maybe sometimes that's your safe haven. You're out of the house, you've gone to work, you can actually, because most people see victims as being not allowed to leave the house. Well, sometimes actually if they maybe haven't got children, they have gone out to work, but unfortunately that then becomes something that, say, the workplace aren't aware of. And how do you statistically, if you looked at an organization with, I don't know, 500 employees or whatever, somewhere in there are going to be people that are going home at the end of the day to a domestically abusive situation, and that is frightening. So we should, I always say that we should never judge. We should always just hopefully approach anything we do when we talk to people with a listening kind of ear. And that's one thing I will say about family and friends as well. It's very difficult for family and friends to support their loved ones who have been victims or survivors of domestic abuse. And again, all you can really do is listen. If you say, I know, I understand, that's going to set somebody off. Absolutely. Because you're just going to go, well, you don't know and you don't understand. So, I'm really passionate about getting that message out there as well, that family and friends also can access support, can't they? If they wanted to bring up a charity and ask for support and say, look, I really don't know how to, talk to my sister, or I don't know how to talk to my brother, and I'm worried about them, then you can actually get that support yourself. Because they're the ones trying to navigate that absolute labyrinth that is domestic abuse.
And with the Domestic Abuse Act, they extended the controlling coercive behaviour offence to cover post-separation abuse as well, which is really good.
That's a biggie.
And also the the disclosure of, they call it revenge porn. It's private sexual photographs, I would say, in films. They extend the offence to not just them disclosing them, it's actually also the threat of disclosing them as well. So they've taken that even further, which is really good.
Yeah.
And then also we have got, they've created a new offence of non-fatal strangulation and suffocation of another person.
Yeah.
Because that is something, I mean, one of the questions, you know, that you always get on the risk assessment is, have they ever tried to strangle you, suffocate you, or drown you?
Yeah.
And I've had ones where they've tried to drown them. So, you know, that is, I'm glad they've done that. They've really taken that a lot further.
Yeah. And again, because it's hard, isn't it? I mean, if you're in a situation where your partner has, you know, obviously attempted to strangle you, or just to show you that they had that power and control over you, how you then go to the police and disclose that when that person's saying to you, no one's going to believe you. You know, I've not left any marks. No one's going to believe you. I'll never do it again. You know, I was stressed out. You know, you pushed me to it. All those kind of excuses that you hear. It's very hard for a victim to come forward. But if things like this are actually being, if these hideous abuses are actually being included in the Domestic Abuse Act, we have more of a chance of people thinking, you know what, if that is actually a crime now, fantastic. Maybe I can feel like I've got that support there, because 20 years ago, if you said your partner had strangled you or attempted to strangle you, be, well, you know what, he said, she said, there's no proof.
Yeah, and if there's no marks, that's when it's so frustrating for police officers. You get loads of police officers that are very frustrated by that. Another thing they put in is that, so the whole thing about, you know, when they say, the media call it sex game that went wrong. It's actually, they reinstated in the statute the general position that a person cannot consent to the infliction of serious harm, and by extension of that, unable to consent to their own death. You know, the whole, oh, I did it by accident.
As if you would. That's brilliant, because it's those kind of things that are not discussed, aren't, you know, and if they're, again, if this is all being included, then maybe we're actually getting somewhere slowly.
And it's trying to extend, it's also in the guidance, it says about extending, obviously, the achieving of best evidence in criminal courts through the use of like video evidence, screens, other special measures. So these are things, I mean, I used to do all the, you know, the video interviews, and quite often they're not used as much as they should be, the video interviews. So it's all about, it's sort of giving the special measures for, you know, getting people to go to court. And it's so difficult because obviously you're reliving it again. You're going into court. Quite often when I did it, they always used to put a screen up. However, you could still hear other members of the family. You know, that sort of thing.
And even if you don't have a screen, say, for example, I would imagine if you've got your barrister or whoever there, all a perpetrator has to do is lean back a little bit, have a good little nosy, eyeball you, let them know, let you know that they are there watching you, but it's not seen as or deemed as being intimidating, or, you know, there's so many ways. This is the worry, isn't it? There's so many ways that they can get around those so-called measures to help, and it is really difficult, because if they want to find a way to intimidate you and let you know that they still have the upper hand or whatever it is they feel they have, then they will do it, and they will find a way of doing it. And you know, this is why we need that education, don't we? We need that understanding, because if we can all understand it a bit better, and right from the justice system to whoever, that to just Joe Bloggs walking down the street understanding it, we all need to have a better understanding of the impact that it does have and how far reaching it is. I can't believe how much we've covered.
I know.
I'm just thinking, we probably could do about another 3 hours. We need to book another one in, definitely, 100%. We're gonna do another. It'll become the Dip In and Out with Lucy and Tracy show.
I'll do that.
I love it. We'll have our own season. I'm learning now. Seasons you get on Spotify, apparently. But thank you so much, because honestly, everything that you obviously have discussed is so important, and so many people won't have an understanding. And what's beautiful about this is it's done in a way that isn't intimidating, it isn't scary. It's a conversation, and anybody can hopefully listen and watch if they want to.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing for somebody, you know, if they're in that position and then they listen and obviously they learn about actually what is out there, because it's such a mystified thing, you know, people not realizing about going to court, not realizing what is actually out there, what they can do, you know, and to be empowered. Actually,
that's the word. That is the word for the day. Yeah, it is. It's empowering. It's giving that power back to the victim to say, you know what, here's all these resources, here's all these support services you can access, and do it at your own pace. And, you know, and something else I was going to say before we finish was, a lot of the time it could be that the abuse has gone on many years ago, and maybe you're out of that situation and you didn't realize it was abuse because it wasn't discussed, and now you're in a situation where you're listening to something like this or watching it thinking, oh my god, I can relate to so many of those things, and actually, yeah, that was abuse, right? Maybe I do need to go and get some support because I've realized that I haven't actually processed everything that's happened to me. Maybe that explains a few things about my life and why I handle things in certain ways. And I think that's important. We're almost forgetting that that lost generation, if you like, of people that maybe don't even realize that what they experienced was domestic abuse.
And, definitely, yeah.
And we hear them, and we're here to say, this is where you can get support, this is where you can get help. And it doesn't matter if it happened to you 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you experienced it, you know, a long time ago, it doesn't matter. It has long-lasting effects, and you have every right. I always say you have every right to as much happiness as the next person. Cheesy as that sounds, it's true.
It is.
So thank you so much, Tracy, and we'll be booking in for our next one very soon.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Thank you.